We have been watching President Trump's announcement of federal judge Neil Gorsuch as his pick to fill the vacant seat, that ninth empty seat for almost the past year on the United States Supreme Court. As we watch the crowd in the East Room continue to applaud the president and Judge Gorsuch, we're back in our studio, joined by our guests here, Elizabeth Wydra, president of the Progressive Constitutional Accountability Center, and Michael Carvin, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Legal Counsel during the Reagan administration. He is now in private practice. Welcome back to both of you. Let me start with you, Michael Carvin. We heard President Trump call Neil Gorsuch eminently qualified. He talked of him in the mold of Antonin Scalia, whose seat he will fill. What do we know about Judge Gorsuch?
He's probably as brilliant as Scalia. He's devoted to the rule of the law in the same way that Scalia is. Scalia's a New Yorker. He's from the West, so the personalities, as you probably saw right there, are a little different. He's very modest, circumspect, and universally respected in a very partisan town like Washington, D.C. As President Trump noted, he got broad bipartisan support when he was nominated to the 10th Circuit, and there's a lot of people on both sides of the aisle that have genuine respect for his intellect and his honesty.
In fact, he said, Elizabeth Wydra, the president, did, that when he came up for confirmation in the Senate, it was unanimous for him, which is unusual these days.
Yeah, you know, I think we used to have more unanimous confirmations, but it's very different to be a justice than a judge on a lower appellate court. And that's why it's so important here to look very carefully at his record. He said many of the things that many of us want to hear, but we need more than just lip service. We need to see a record that shows that he is faithful to the Constitution, and not just the parts he likes. He has been talked about as an originalist. Well, does that just apply to the parts of the Constitution like gun rights that he might have matching policy preferences for? Does it also apply to the amended Constitution that made our country more equal, more just, and more free, and gave broad powers to the federal government to enforce civil rights, enforce voting rights, and make sure that there's no discrimination against people of color, religious minorities, and women? So we're going to be looking very closely at the record in the weeks to come.
So, Michael Carvin, what are the questions going to be about him? What stands out in his writings and his decisions as a judge that you think are going to be the markers through this confirmation process?
Again, faithful adherence to the law is certainly the dominant characteristic of what he's done. He pursues results even if he doesn't like them. For example, he struck down a campaign finance law in Colorado. I think most noteworthy among his opinions is the Hobby Lobby opinion, which was affirmed by the Supreme Court, which interpreted the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act to allow people to escape the contraceptive mandate if they had strongly held religious beliefs against it. I don't think he has the kind of track record where he's dealt with every conceivable issue that's come before the court, but that's really an unrealistic requirement. I think what the senators should be looking for is he the kind of person who's an honest broker and will follow the law and not impose his own policy preferences. I'm afraid that hasn't always been the case with Democratic senators when they were assessing Clarence Thomas and Justice Alito and Chief Justice Roberts. I'm hoping that we can return to an old system and accord them the kind of deference that was afforded to, for example, Justice Ginsburg and Justice Breyer when they were put forward a fair and low-key hearing.
And you're right, that has been the city of Washington, and our political system, our political atmosphere has certainly grown more polarized since then. But Elizabeth Wydra, a moment ago, you mentioned some of your questions or the questions you'd like to see posed to him. Where do you think the main concerns will be for Democrats as they look at his record?
Yeah, I think part of that is, as Michael said, not every issue has come before him in his time on the Court of Appeals. And so that's why the hearing and the questionnaire and everything that goes around this is incredibly important. Because there, in addition to substantive questions, you know, and those are legion, especially when you have a process like we had here, where President Trump said during his campaign repeatedly that he had several litmus tests for the nominee, which is kind of problematic. We normally don't do that in our nominee processes because it suggests maybe that you're guaranteeing to the president you're going to vote a certain way in a case, and we want our justices to take the cases as they come. But I think there's going to be an additional focus here on whether the nominee is going to be someone who will be truly independent. And that's something that I think the hearing will be very important. There will be a lot of questions about that. Whether
what do you mean independent?
Serve as a check on constitutional violations, potential corruption. The judiciary plays an incredibly important role in our democratic constitutional system, and the Supreme Court is at its pinnacle. So you want someone who will really follow the law where it leads and not be beholden to any particular political agenda, and particularly not feel beholden to the president who is nominating you to be on the court.
Michael Carvin, if those are the questions that are put to Judge Gorsuch, how would he answer them?
President Lincoln famously said if we asked Justice Chase a question on a case that was going to be in front of him in the Supreme Court, we would despise him if he answered it. And that's the problem, right? You cannot have a judge prejudge the decisions that are going to come before him. It's certainly fair game to ask their general judicial philosophy and their general approach to the law, but to ask for some kind of reverse litmus test where Democratic senators are saying, will you rule this way in a particular case, is just as destructive of judicial independence as doing it up front. So I think, again, you can certainly probe deeply into the way he will approach the law. You cannot ask for a specific commitment on a case that could come before him.
We were talking just a moment ago before just as we heard the president's announcement, Elizabeth Wydra, that Judge Gorsuch would be the first person who had served as a clerk to a Supreme Court justice to then be serving alongside that justice. He referred to having served as a justice both for Byron White, or I'm sorry, as a clerk for Justice Byron White and Justice Anthony Kennedy. Assuming he's confirmed, he'll be serving alongside Justice Kennedy. How will a Neil Gorsuch change the texture of this court?
Well, I think that's why we need to look so closely at his record. You know, we see, comparing him to Justice Kennedy, just as recently as last term, voted to uphold the right of women to choose to have an abortion. Given this litmus test that Donald Trump purportedly has about having someone on the bench who will overturn Roe, you know, that's obviously a clear contrast. I think people are also going to be looking at the religious liberty aspects here, another one of those litmus tests that Trump said he would use. And that Hobby Lobby case that Michael referenced, where a lot of people see that they were putting the rights of corporations above the right of women to access contraception to which they are entitled under the law.
Michael Carvin, just in a few seconds, what do you think is going to get the most attention in his record as we get ready to hear him before the confirmation hearing?
I don't think there's anything explosive there. I think the explosions will come depending on the Democrats' attitude about this. This could be a very low-key, respectful hearing. I'm a little nervous that because of the Merrick Garland hangover and the general reaction to what President Trump has done, we will revisit the kind of contentious hearings that we had for Clarence Thomas and other wonderful jurists who were treated very shabbily by the Judiciary Committee.
Merrick Garland, of course, being President Obama's pick for this seat on the court. Republicans refused to hold hearings for Merrick Garland starting last February, arguing that that this seat was something the next president should name.